Click here to subscribe our channel. Do not forget to press the bell icon to get regular updates of free videos.
Today we'll be starting with macroeconomics. So first of all, I will be giving you just an overview of macroeconomics. Then what will be the source, previous year question paper, and then I will be starting with the content part. So the syllabus of advanced macroeconomics. Advanced macro. So it is paper 1. The syllabus of advanced macro include approaches to employment, income and interest rate determination, classical Keynesian within bracket ISLM curve, neoclassical synthesis, neoclassical theories of interest rate determination and interest rate structure. So the UPSC site basically gives the syllabus of advanced macro in paper 1. So the syllabus part of advanced macro include approaches to employment, income and interest rate determination, classical and Keynesian approach, neoclassical synthesis, neoclassical theories of interest rate determination and interest rate structure. But many things which has been asked has not been mentioned here. So there are some unwritten part as well. So first write down the detailed syllabus, what we are going to cover, from which source we will be referring. So important sources. Then we will be going by the question. So what is the weightage of macro section in paper 1, you will get to know. And then we will start with the content part. So the advanced macroeconomics, you can say it starts with the classical approach. We will be starting with the classical approach. That means you can say that entire macroeconomics is broadly divided into two parts. One is the classical or traditional approach and other is Keynesian approach. So the old economists clubbed together, they were following a certain principle. Based upon those principles, we can say that they are following the classical assumption or classical approach. So that was classical approach of income determination, classical approach of interest rate determination. But certainly there was a drawback in that classical approach. That drawback was overcome by Keynes. So the followers of Keynes, they are following a certain set of principle as propagated by Keynes. They are Keynesian economics. Nowadays many economists follow classical approach but with modification. So they are post classical or neoclassical. Some follow Keynesian but they have modified the Keynesian approach. So they are post Keynesian or neo Keynesian. So we'll start with, obviously we'll have to start with the classical approach, identify the problem that will be overcome by the Keynesian approach, that will be, you can say that it will be countered by the classical. That means classical will defend themselves, but then they will modify themselves also. They will be clubbed as a neoclassical. So it is basically, we can say that an ongoing debate. So the concept in macro evolve over time. The concept of macro is basically evolving over time. So when we are referring to the classical economist, primarily you are referring to the macroeconomics as we understood before 1936. So Keynes and the concept came after that. So pre 1936 you can say one section that will be traditional classical, after that Keynesian, or in fact both will be studied, and nowadays it is neoclassical as well as neo-Keynesian, and some are talking about the synthesis of both approach as well. That means there are some merit in classical and some merit in the Keynesian part also. So in the classical approach we will have to explain first how employment and output get determined, and then rate of interest. So there will be certain aspect here. One will be the classical aggregate supply, because to explain macroeconomics we have to derive the aggregate supply, aggregate demand, rate of interest theory, then we can explain the classical approach. So in the classical approach we have to derive first of all the classical aggregate supply, that we will be going to discuss in the first class. Then we will be deriving classical aggregate demand. So AS and AD will be two important tool. Aggregate supply and aggregate demand will be two important tool here. So we have to derive aggregate supply curve first, then aggregate demand curve. After that, in the classical approach, classical theory of rate of interest, classical theory of interest rate determination, and then we can talk about the policy implication. Policy implication, that means what will be the policy implication of policy implication on economy. So fiscal policy implication, monetary policy change implication, but to explain that we need tool, and it will be provided by aggregate supply curve, aggregate demand curve, and classical theory of rate of interest, which is known as loanable fund theory of rate of interest. These topics you should be covering from chapter number 3 and chapter number 4, mainly from Freud, Richard Freud. So main book is here, we can say for the classical approach will be the Freud. Clear? So I'm just giving an overview. It is not an exhaustive detailed syllabus, but the main things that will be explained in classical approach will be classical AS, classical AD, classical theory of rate of interest, policy implication. Within that we can also include a classical quantity theory of money. Clear? After that we will move to the Keynesian approach. Classical versus Keynesian. So in the Keynesian approach, again we have to discuss how employment and output get determined. How employment and output get determined, then how rate of interest get determined. And to determine that rate of interest, Keynesian approach basically followed ISLM tool as provided by Hansen, the curve provided by Hansen, but it is effectively being used by Keynesian approach. So in the Keynesian approach, there are in fact many questions. So one aspect will be the derivation of IS curve, equation part, its slope, shift of IS curve, then LM, its derivation, slope and shift. And remember, just this one curve is representing goods market equilibrium, another curve is representing money market equilibrium. So one IS curve is representing goods market equilibrium, income equal to spending, that is why it is IS, income equal to spending. So in the Keynesian approach we say that income is determined by spending, that is aggregate spending, consumption spending, investment spending, government spending, net export. So when Y is equal to AD, goods market is in equilibrium, that means income is equal to spending. In that way we get IS curve. We have to explain in detail. On LM curve it is money market equilibrium. L for liquidity preference, that is demand for money. M for money supply. So when money demand is equal to money supply, we have money market equilibrium. So money market equilibrium will be represented by LM curve. And when both market will be in equilibrium, then we can say that economy is in equilibrium. When both market will be in equilibrium, then economy will be in equilibrium. So in the Keynesian approach, we have to determine income as well as rate of interest, and that will be determined by intersection of IS curve and LM curve. So intersection of IS curve and LM curve will be determining income as well as rate of interest. Clear? So we have to explain, I am just giving you the perspective, what will be the content included in the Keynesian approach. So it will be the starting point, apart from the concept of multiplier, balance rate multiplier and so on. Then here also you have to explain the policy implication. what will be the effect of monetary policy change and fiscal policy change on this income and rate of interest. So when there will be fiscal changes, it will be affecting the IS curve. When there will be monetary changes, it will be affecting the LM curve. But either way, we have to determine in which case policy is effective, in which case it is not effective, in which case it is less effective, in which case it is more effective. So the Keynesian approach mainly involves the tool of IS and LM, plus there is a concept of crowding out, liquidity trap, frequently asked question we can say, and also one or two numerical part, because from last 2 year 2020 as well as 2019, in both year one numerical has been asked. You will have this topic wise question on in your account. So in 2020, this question number 4, consumption spending, investment spending, net export, autonomous taxes, income tax rate, marginal propensity to consume, etc. were given, and then we have to find certain variables. I will be solving that question when we will be discussing the Keynesian approach. And in 19 also there was a numerical question number 12. These numericals, remember, are not difficult one. These are not difficult numericals. Just you must know the step how to calculate. That's it. There is no difficulty in numerical here. So in 2019 and 2020, in both year one question has been asked. Before that, no question was asked numerically from the macro section. Clear? And number of question you can say from the macro section. You find in 2020 one question, second, third, 4 question, 5 question, and I think 2 more. So in fact 6 question, 6 parts from macro. So around 100 marks or sometimes more than 100 is from macro. In 2019 also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can say at least 5 to 6 part is from the macro section out of that total 28 number of question. Clear? Now out of those 5 or 6 question, you will find at least I think 2 or 3 question from the classical approach and the Keynesian approach. So in the Keynesian approach, it is mainly IS and LM and determination of income and interest rate, but this will take more time as compared to classical approach, because there are many short question also involved here in the Keynesian approach. The reference for Keynesian approach, I will suggest Dornbusch and Fisher. Dornbusch and Fisher, DFS in short, Dornbusch, Fisher and Starch in fact, and 4 chapters I will say, but the numbering of chapter will depend upon the edition. So it will start with income and spending. Income and spending. In old edition it will be chapter number 3, but I think in the new edition it is chapter number 9. So you can just find that. Chapter number 4 then, money, interest and income. Money, interest and income. Then chapter number 5 is monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy and fiscal policy. And then chapter number 7 is aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So I think at least these 4 chapters you should be covering from Dornbusch and Fisher. Clear? So for classical approach, go by this. For Keynesian, you should be reading, although if you are studying it from front, no problem, but I will be referring Dornbusch and Fisher in the class. Clear? So one part will be this, second part will be this. In this first round of macro, we will be covering this classical and Keynesian version. Clear? Then obviously the current economists, those who are following classical but they have modified the classical economist, that will be part of neoclassical, and those who are following Keynes with modification are post cognition or neo cognition. That will be a separate part. So if you are writing it the exhaustive content, then one is classical, other is cognition. Third, you can say neoclassical versus neo-Keynesian. So there are certain topics like a Fooling model given by Friedman. So Friedman was basically a new classical economist. So he modified the classical. So neoclassical and neo-Keynesian, you can read chapter number 17 from Gordon. So whatever I am mentioning mainly are included in your macro material. It is there in your study material. You don't have to buy, let us say, Freund separately or Dornbusch and Fisher separately or Gordon separately. You may also read it from Freund. So Gordon and Freund both, we can say. These were the topics mentioned in the syllabus. So what is not mentioned in the syllabus is the section of inflation and unemployment. So the question related to inflation and unemployment, particularly with respect to Phillips curve, then Ocon's law, long run Phillips curve, short run Phillips curve. So concept related to inflation and unemployment. For this section, you should be preferring Blanchard, and it is chapter number 6, 7, 8 and 9. Again, these 4 chapters are included in your study material part. So one section from which you are expecting question will be the inflation and unemployment. Apart from this inflation and unemployment, there are other topic in macroeconomics like demand for money. So demand for money was also included in the classical concept, also included in the Keynesian concept, and there are some certain recent changes as well. Like in 2020, the question of there was a question. You can read question number 6. Explain how Keynesian speculative demand for money is restated in the regressive expectation model. Point out this limitation. A regressive expectation model. So this was basically a new question in 20. You know that speculative demand for money concept. You can write it from the front also. But here the question was explain how Keynesian speculative demand for money is restated in the regressive expectation model. So now the requirement of the question is that you must be knowing that a regressive expectation model. Now this regressive expectation model is the first topic when you read demand for money chapter in Branson. It discusses other models as well, but the first topic is the regressive expectation model. So those topics, you can say one part is demand for money. There are various models or theories within that. So for that purpose, read only one chapter in Branson. The scan, this chapter has been scanned and uploaded in the on the site. It is not included in your spiral. It is not included in that. But since that question has came later, so we have included and provided you the material, a scanned copy. So demand for money, then add investment part as well, and other is consumption, like current income hypothesis, permanent income hypothesis, life cycle income hypothesis, intertemporal income hypothesis. Although those question has not been asked so far, but if you are preparing for new question, since one topic has been asked this year, regressive expectation model, so you should be reading that chapter. From investment also a question was there in terms of Tobin's Q. Consumption so far has not been asked in terms of life cycle income hypothesis or permanent income hypothesis, but you should be reading, I think. So these are three chapters, I think chapter number 12, 13 and 14 from Branson. Clear? So the source for this demand for money section will be this. So in the macroeconomic section, usually you will get question from the classical approach, the Keynesian approach, that is ISLM, then from new Keynesian approach, inflation and unemployment section, Phillips curve or consolidated question, demand for money. One part of macro is also your open economy, but that is included in your international economics section. So open economy is also part of macroeconomics, but that is included in the international economics. Clear? So I think the main references, if I repeat, apart from your HLO, just remember many students are reading that. I am not saying don't read that book. You are reading it, no problem, but if you are referring to the core references, core book, then for classical I will suggest Freund. For Keynesian I am suggesting Dormouse and Fisher. For neoclassical and new Keynesian, Freund as well as Gordon. Inflation and unemployment section, you can read it from Freund also. There are certain topic in Freund explain well, but chapter 6, 7, 8 and 9 from Blanchard. There is demand for money, investment and consumption from Branson. So you can say 4 or 5 books involved in the macro section, including Freund, Blanchard, Dormouse and Fisher, Branson and Gordon. Clear? So these were the content part, references. So most of the references included in your study material, and as far as question is concerned, I said around 6 question is usually there from the macro section. So last year also, 2019 also, 2018 also, and plus one more thing, you will find that in the last 2-3 years the question in macro section is becoming more and more applied in nature. Applied means it is not that you have the ready-made answer available in the book and you just can copy there. Like the concept of multiplier is there in every book. You know the basic meaning of multiplier, you know the equation of that multiplier also. But question modified, like in all the book we assume that consumption as a function of income, but investment as autonomous. But the question was that what will be the impact on multiplier if consumption and investment both are a function of income? If both are a function of income, then what will be the impact on the multiplier? So those type of numerical, those type of applied question you must be able to attempt in exam. So I think this was the question in 2018, question number 16. In the simple Keynesian model, if consumption and investment both are function of income, how would the multiplier be affected? So obviously there will be two part of the answer. In the initial part you will say that only consumption as a function of income, then what is multiplier? So that part you are getting in the book. But if investment is also a function of income, then what will be the impact on multiplier? You have to apply that concept. In future it may say that transfer is also a function of income, then what will be the multiplier value? So if you know the concept of multiplier, if you know how to derive that equation of multiplier, then you will be able to solve any other applied question as well. Clear? So the weightage for this macroeconomics is a 6 sub part. So source you know, and the weightage around 6 question, roughly you can say 100 marks. Clear? So now we can start with the classical and Keynesian part, but before starting exactly classical model, I will give you just overview again, difference between, main differences between classical and the Keynesian approach. So you can write it in the rough, you may make it a tabular form division. Keep all those differences in mind, because that differences are in fact many, and you will be referring to those differences when we will be reading, let us say, the concept of demand for money, There also there is a difference between classical demand for money and Keynesian demand for money. The difference between aggregate supply, so there is a classical aggregate supply, classical aggregate demand. Even the role of money as explained by classical, as explained by Keynesian part. So classical and Keynesian difference is key to understand the basics of macroeconomics. So you can take a fresh page and classical approach and Keynesian approach. Remember, these are two different school of thought. That means they follow a certain principle. So all classical economists follow a certain principle. Similarly, Keynesian economists, they are following a certain set of